These are killers who walked into a courtroom and cried. One of them admitted on a recorded call that he planned the whole thing before he even walked in. The rest had their own reasons. Here is what each one did, and what they looked like when they finally had to answer for it. 1. Dylan Shoemaker. In March of 2013, in Springville, New York, a 16-year-old named Dylan Shoemaker beat his girlfriend's 23-month-old son to death and then walked into a courtroom and cried about it. Shoemaker was living with his mother at the time, along with his 19-year-old girlfriend Ashley Smith and her 2 young children, Austin, who was just days away from turning 2, and a 2-month-old baby named Christopher. On the afternoon of March 19th, Ashley left for her shift at Pizza Hut at around 4:20, leaving Shoemaker in charge of both kids. Around 8:20 that evening, he called 911 to report that Austin was unresponsive. When deputies arrived, they found the toddler lying on a bed upstairs, bleeding from the mouth with large bruises on both sides of his face. His pupils were dilated and he had no pulse. Shoemaker was standing outside on the porch with his mother when they got there. At trial, Shoemaker took the stand and admitted he had become frustrated with Austin for crying, so he slapped him. Then he spanked him. Then he placed a pillow over the back of the toddler's head and punched him repeatedly. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a guilty verdict on second-degree murder. At sentencing in January of 2014, Shoemaker came into the courtroom crying. He told the judge and Austin's mother that he never meant to hurt him, that he loved him, that he would give his own life if he could. His defense attorney pushed for the minimum, arguing his client was young, immature, and had a difficult upbringing. Justice M. William Bowler wasn't moved. He had a phone call to read into the record first, a recorded call Shoemaker had made from the holding center to his mother, in which he said, "I'm a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury and they're going to feel sorry for me." On top of that, phone records showed that on the same day Austin died, Shoemaker had been sending over 200 texts, arranging a drug deal, and talking to another girl. The judge said it directly, that when the texting stopped, the beating started. Bowler sentenced him to the maximum, 25 years to life. On appeal, that was later reduced to 18 years to life. But the conviction held. Shoemaker cried in that courtroom, just as he had planned. It just didn't work the way he thought it would. And, if premeditated courtroom tears are unsettling, the next case involves a man who cried about fairness and justice after doing a horrible crime. 2. Ashford Thompson. Just after 2 in the morning on July 13, 2008, in Twinsburg, Ohio, a traffic stop for loud music turned fatal. Twinsburg police officer Joshua McTarian pulled over 23-year-old Ashford Thompson for playing music from his car. By the time backup arrived, McTarian was on the ground and dying. Thompson had been out late with his girlfriend, Danielle Robertson, and the two had stopped at a bar before heading home. McTarian followed Thompson's car for the noise, then pulled into the driveway of Thompson's former residence on Glenwood Drive, right behind him. He called dispatch to report the stop and requested backup shortly after. A dispatcher relayed that Thompson held a license to carry a concealed weapon. McTarian never responded to that message. Witnesses nearby reported hearing yelling, then popping sounds. When officers arrived, McTarian was on the ground with Thompson's driver's license and insurance card still in his front shirt pocket. According to court testimony and evidence, McTarian had managed to get one handcuff on Thompson's wrist when Thompson drew his weapon and opened fire, shooting McTarian 4 times in the head at close range. Thompson and Robertson then drove to his sister's home in Bedford Heights, where his sister placed the gun on the stove. Police tracked them there within the hour. Thompson was still wearing one of McTarian's handcuffs on his wrist when they arrested him. McTarian was flown to Metro Health Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. He was 33 years old, an 11-year veteran of the department, and the first officer in Twinsburg Police Department history to be killed in the line of duty. He left behind his wife Holly, also a police officer, and their 3-month-old daughter, Thea. A jury convicted Thompson of aggravated murder in 2010, and he was sentenced to death. In the lead-up to sentencing, Thompson appeared in court in tears, complaining about jail conditions, saying he wasn't receiving his mail, that he was being harassed, that he just couldn't get a fair trial. At sentencing, Holly McTarian told the court she believed his apology was entirely an act, and pointed to his recorded jail calls as proof there was no remorse behind it. The jury recommended death. The Ohio Supreme Court later upheld the conviction unanimously, though it split 4-3 on whether the death penalty was appropriate. His execution was scheduled for 2017 but has been repeatedly postponed while appeals continue. As of early 2026, Thompson remains on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution with a pending mental illness petition seeking to have his sentence reduced. Moving on from a cop killer crying about fairness to two 13-year-olds who showed up with a plan to blame someone else for what they were about to do. 3. Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape. In Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, on September 17, 2012, two 13-year-old boys went to an elderly woman's home with a hatchet and a hammer. By the time they left, 78-year-old Barbara Olson was dead on the floor of her garage. One of the boys was her own great-grandson. Antonio Barbeau had been staying with his grandmother and needed money. He and his friend Nathan Pape had decided Barbara was the target, as she was, in their words, somewhat rich and could be killed for money. Barbeau brought a hatchet. Pape brought a hammer. Pape's mother dropped them off on Olson Street without knowing anything was wrong, and the moment she drove away, the two boys slipped into Barbara's garage through an unlocked side door. Barbara heard them, recognized Antonio, and welcomed them inside. She even told him she would call his mother to let her know where he was. Then, she turned her back. Barbeau struck her in the head with the blunt end of the hatchet, knocking her to the floor. What followed was methodical and brutal. The medical examiner counted 27 separate blows, 18 of them to Barbara's head. At one point, Barbeau used the sharp end of the hatchet, and the blade lodged in her skull. Pape struck her twice with the hammer. When it was over, the boys searched the house, took jewelry and a purse containing $150 in cash. They tried to load Barbara's body into the trunk of her car and couldn't, so they covered her with a blanket and left. The next day, they drove her car to a nearby bowling alley, went to a supermarket, bought cleaning wipes and gloves, then returned to wipe the interior clean of fingerprints and blood. They left the keys in the seat and the jewelry in plain view, hoping someone would steal the car and take the blame. Then they bought marijuana and pizza with the stolen money. Police connected the crime to them through a school paper found in the car bearing the name Nate, and through Barbeau, who confessed within days and implicated his friend. Both boys were charged as adults with first-degree intentional homicide. Barbeau pleaded no contest. At sentencing in August of that same year, both boys broke down and asked for forgiveness. Judge Timothy Van Ackeren told the courtroom he had never seen anything even close to this case in all his years on the bench. He sentenced Barbeau to life, with parole eligibility at age 50. Pape received life as well, with parole eligibility at age 45. 4. Jaleel Smith Riley. On the night of November 16, 2013, in Norwood, Ohio, a 20-year-old woman named Portia Brooks was sitting in a parked car with her 21-year-old boyfriend Aaron Martin when a man walked up, ordered Martin out at gunpoint, shot him in the head, then leaned into the car and shot Portia too. Martin survived with lasting neurological damage from the gunshot wound. Portia died 3 days later. She was 22 years old. The shooter was Jaleel Smith Riley, and he got nothing from the robbery. Martin had nothing on him worth taking. Smith Riley shot him anyway, then killed Portia on his way out. The case went cold for nearly 2 years. Then, a Crime Stoppers tip identified Smith Riley by name, and Norwood police arrested him on October 15, 2015. 2 other suspects were named alongside him, but one was already in custody in Michigan and the other had died before trial. Smith Riley pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and attempted murder in August of 2016, but when sentencing day arrived on September 12th, he stood up mid-hearing and reversed his plea entirely, against his own attorney's advice. Portia's mother, Sharon Brooks, had carried her daughter's ashes to that hearing. She brought them back again when the case returned the following month. Judge Charles Kubicki Jr. denied the withdrawal on October 19, 2016. He kept the guilty plea in place, took the death penalty off the table, and sentenced Smith Riley to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Smith Riley collapsed in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Minutes before that, he had been sobbing through an apology, telling the court he had made a mistake. He was 23 years old. As of March 2026, he remains incarcerated at the Madison Correctional Institution in London, Ohio, with no path to release. And if a last-minute plea reversal is shocking, the next case involves a man who helped wipe out an entire family. 6. Tatiana Fusari. On August 2, 2018, in Solon Township, Michigan, a 10-month-old girl named Mary Welch was found dead in her crib. She had been born at 6 pounds and 14 ounces. When she died, she weighed 8 pounds, 1 pound and 2 ounces more than on the day she was born. Mary's father, Seth Welch, texted an acquaintance about selling a goat before he called 911. When he finally did call, he described his daughter to the dispatcher as dead as a doornail. First responders arrived to find a severely emaciated infant with sunken eyes and cheeks and no muscle mass. The autopsy confirmed death by malnutrition and dehydration. She had been left alone for 17 hours before her body was found, placed in her crib the previous afternoon, and never checked on again. Investigators learned that both Welch and his girlfriend Tatiana Fusari had noticed Mary getting thinner for about a month. They did not take her to a doctor, citing religious beliefs, distrust of the medical system, and fear of child protective services. In court, Welch told investigators his daughter's death was part of natural selection and said he was not losing any sleep over it. The video of their arraignment in August of 2018 went viral, showing Welch sitting with his mouth open in shock while Fusari wept as felony murder charges were read aloud. Welch was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse in January of 2020 and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Fusari initially pleaded no contest to second-degree charges with a minimum of 25 years, but later withdrew that plea after a Michigan Supreme Court ruling opened the door to a duress defense. At her trial in October of 2021, she testified that Welch had beaten and raped her for years, held an AK-style rifle to her head, and once performed an exorcism on her while she was pregnant. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and convicted her of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse. On November 17, 2021, Judge Paul Denenfeld sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She said nothing at sentencing. The Michigan Court of Appeals denied her appeal in March of 2023. As of early 2026, both Welch and Fusari remain incarcerated, and their children are in the care of relatives and foster families. 7. Oscar Pistorius. On Valentine's Day of 2013, in Pretoria, South Africa, Paralympic champion and Olympic sprinter Oscar Pistorius shot his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp 4 times through a locked bathroom door and killed her. Pistorius was 26 years old at the time and already one of the most recognizable athletes in the world. Known as the Blade Runner for the carbon fiber prosthetic legs he used to compete, he had made history just months earlier by racing against able-bodied athletes at the 2012 London Olympics. Reeva Steenkamp was 29, a model and law graduate. They had been together for about 3 months. Pistorius called emergency services himself in the early hours of the morning. He told police he had woken in the night, believed there was an intruder in the bathroom, grabbed his 9mm pistol, and fired 4 shots through the locked cubicle door before realizing Steenkamp was not in bed. He smashed through the door with a cricket bat. She died in his arms before help arrived. The prosecution's version was different. 2 neighbors separately told the court they had heard screaming and arguing from the house earlier that night. Forensic evidence showed that Steenkamp had been standing upright and facing the door when the first bullet struck her in the hip. Her phone was found inside the bathroom. Prosecutors argued that Pistorius knew exactly who was behind that door. His trial began on March 3, 2014, in the High Court in Pretoria. It ran for 7 months and was broadcast live around the world. Throughout the proceedings, Pistorius broke down repeatedly. He sobbed so loudly on the stand that Judge Thokozile Masipa adjourned the court to let him recover. He vomited twice into a bucket during the trial, once when the pathologist described Steenkamp's injuries, and again when photographs of her body were shown. He wailed and rocked in his seat. His defense maintained every reaction was genuine, but a South African journalist alleged he had been coached by a famous local actor before the trial, and Steenkamp's own mother told reporters she watched his crying and still could not tell whether it was real. Pistorius denied the coaching claim entirely. On September 12, 2014, Judge Masipa acquitted Pistorius of murder and convicted him of culpable homicide, the South African equivalent of manslaughter. She sentenced him to 5 years in prison the following month. The public reaction was furious. Prosecutors appealed, and in December of 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the verdict and convicted him of murder under dolus eventualis, meaning he knew someone behind that door could die and fired anyway. On July 6, 2016, He was sentenced to 6 years for murder. That sentence was later appealed again by prosecutors and increased on November 24, 2017 to 13 years and 5 months. Pistorius was released on parole on January 5, 2024, after serving nearly 9 years. He lives at his uncle's home in Pretoria under strict parole conditions and will remain under supervision until December of 2029. As a condition of his parole, he is banned from speaking to the media until his sentence expires. And if the question of whether Pistorius was acting in court is unsettling, the next case has a man who was genuinely emotional in court. 8. Chris Watts. On the morning of August 13, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, Chris Watts strangled his pregnant wife Shanann and drove his 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, to an oil field where he worked, and buried Shanann in a shallow grave while the girls were still alive in the truck. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with their son, whom the couple had already named Nico. After dumping Shanann's body, Watts suffocated both girls with a blanket and forced their small bodies through 8-inch holes at the tops of separate oil tanks. He then drove to work, went about his day, and that afternoon called a real estate agent about selling the family home. Shanann had returned home from a work trip in Arizona at about 2 in the morning. Her friend and co-worker Nicole Atkinson called 911 the next afternoon after Shanann missed a doctor's appointment and stopped responding to messages. When police arrived, they found Shanann's car still in the garage, her purse and keys inside, and her phone tucked between the couch cushions. Watts was home when they got there, and he met them on the driveway. He gave tearful television interviews, pleading for his family's return, telling a Denver news crew to please just bring them back. Body camera footage caught him running toward the first officer who arrived, but his face showed no stress and no pain. Police had already started to notice something was off. His neighbor, Nathan Trinastich, offered surveillance footage that showed Watts making 3 trips from the house to his truck that morning. Police watched it with Watts in the room. While it played, he stood with his back to the television, barely glancing at the screen. Trinastich later said that if his own family were missing, he would have been fixed to that screen. Watts just kept looking at his phone. But what happened when the footage buffered is what people still talk about. The television cut back to live programming for a few seconds and an advertisement for American Horror Story. Apocalypse appeared on screen, showing a fetus and skulls submerged in oil. The ad was not staged or manipulated, it was just a commercial for a heavily promoted show at the time. But knowing what was actually in those tanks makes it nearly impossible to look away from. On August 15th, Watts failed a polygraph test. He confessed to his father in a police interrogation room, initially claiming Shanann had killed the girls in a rage and he had strangled her in response. Investigators did not believe him. The bodies were found at the oil site the following day. On November 6, 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to all 9 charges in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table, a request made by Shanann's family. He faced 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He chose not to address the court himself. His attorney read a brief statement on his behalf saying he was truly sorry, while acknowledging that the words meant nothing. Judge Marcelo Kopkow called it the most inhumane crime he had seen in his 17 years on the bench and said Watts deserved nothing less than the maximum sentence. He sentenced Watts to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 to be served consecutively, plus 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy, and 12 years for tampering with the bodies. Watts is currently incarcerated in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, where he has been since December of 2018. He will spend the rest of his life there. If this video kept you watching, subscribe and drop a comment on which case hit the hardest.